Okay, so, you always hear those whispers, right, about like corruption, in all these like high places in government and all that.
Yeah.
But when you see like a really powerful part of the justice system, like seemingly just trying to like sweep a public corruption case under the rug,
Right.
it really does kind of make you like sit up and pay attention.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And that's exactly what we're looking at today.
What's so fascinating about this particular case is that it's not like the usual legal battle you'd expect, right? Like,
Yeah.
you usually have two sides going head to head, right?
Yeah.
But in this one, it's almost like they're both on the same side.
Yeah, it's like they're teaming up in a way you wouldn't really expect.
Exactly. And that immediately raises questions about why that is
Absolutely.
and what the bigger implications might be for, the whole idea of justice and fairness.
Right, because it's not just about this one case. It's about what it says about the system itself. So let's kind of like break it down for everybody. So the Department of Justice, under the Trump administration, and that's like a super important detail here,
Yeah.
decided to try and dismiss a criminal case against the mayor of New York City, Eric Adams.
Right?
But then a federal judge named Dale Ho basically stepped in and was like, hold on a second.
Yeah, he basically pumped the brakes on the whole thing.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to dive deep into today. Like, why did the DOJ want to dismiss this case in the first place?
Right.
What made Judge Ho so hesitant? And what does this all mean for, like, us regular folks who want to see accountability, when people in power maybe do something wrong?
Yeah, because at the end of the day, this is about whether the system works for everyone or just for a select few.
Exactly. So we're basing all of this on some really interesting commentary from a YouTube video that, like, breaks down all these legal moves, like, piece by piece.
Okay, cool. So let's get into it.
Yeah. So if we take a step back for a second,
Yeah.
a lot of times our legal system depends on this, like, tension between opposing sides in the courtroom, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
You've got the prosecution, you've got the defense, and they're like going at it, arguing their cases.
Yeah, it's like a tug of war almost.
Yeah, exactly. And what makes this case so weird is that, like, that tension is just not there.
Yeah, it's like they both dropped the rope and are just kind of standing there.
Right. So let's get into, like, the nitty gritty here. So Donald Trump's former criminal defense attorney,
Okay.
After Trump, he ended up getting this, like, high-ranking job in the DOJ. We'll call him NEB for now.
Okay.
This guy, NEB, is the one who filed the motion to dismiss these public corruption charges against Mayor Adams.
Okay, so the guy who used to defend Trump is now in the DOJ and wants to drop a case against another politician.
Yep. And usually you'd expect the DOJ to be, like, all over these kinds of cases, right?
Yeah, you'd think they'd be the ones, like, leading the charge if they thought there was enough evidence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's how it's supposed to work.
Yeah.
In theory, at least.
Right, the government's lawyers present their case, the defendant's lawyers fight back, and that process is meant to, like, really test the evidence and the argument.
And make sure everything's legit.
Exactly.
But that's where things get a little crazy. The legal commentator, we're looking at this guy, Glenn Kirshner, he's got this really interesting take on the situation.
Okay, what's his theory?
He thinks the DOJ didn't want to dismiss this case because they suddenly thought the evidence was bad or anything like that.
Okay.
He thinks it's because the Trump administration saw some kind of political advantage in having Mayor Adams owing them a favor.
Wow.
And they specifically mentioned immigration as, like, a key issue.
So they dropped the case to get Adams on their side?
That's the idea. That's wild. Yeah. And it's a pretty shocking idea when you really think about it.
Yeah, because it's like they're saying, we'll let you off the hook if you help us out with our political goals.
Yeah. And that just smells like public corruption. Like a prosecutor using their power not to do what's right, but to help out their boss.
Right. It's like they're putting politics ahead of justice.
Exactly. And that's where Judge Dale Ho comes in. He didn't just, like, rubber stamp the DOJ's request.
Right.
He held a hearing. He issued an order saying, nope, not going to dismiss this right away.
Wow. So he really pushed back against the DOJ?
He did. And he went even further than that. He appointed this independent lawyer, Paul Clement, to actually argue against the DOJ's own motion to dismiss.
Okay, so who's this Paul Clement guy?
He was like the U.S. Solicitor General under President George W. Bush. So he's like a big deal in the legal world.
Okay, so he's got serious credentials.
Oh, yeah. And by bringing him in, Judge Ho is basically saying, I'm not comfortable with how this is going down.
Yeah, it's like he's saying, I need another perspective here.
Exactly. And Judge Ho specifically said he was worried about the lack of what he called adversarial testing.
Okay, so what does that mean exactly?
Basically, it means that in this case, you don't have that back and forth between two opposing sides. like we were talking about before.
Right. Usually you've got the prosecution fighting for one thing and the defense fighting for the opposite.
Right. But here the DOJ, who's supposed to be the prosecutor, is actually on the same side as the defendant, Mayor Adams.
So they're both trying to get the case dismissed.
Exactly. And that means you're missing that clash of ideas, that scrutiny of the evidence and the arguments from both sides.
Right. And that's a problem because that's how we make sure that the truth comes out.
Yeah. And Judge Ho made that point really clearly. He said that adversarial testing is super important, especially in cases that are unusual or have a lot of public interest.
And he clearly thought this case fit that description.
Definitely. And it's interesting because Judge Ho's decision might seem kind of out there, but it's not completely unprecedented.
Oh, really?
He actually referenced the case of Michael Flynn. Remember him? He was Trump's national security advisor.
Yeah, vaguely.
Well, in that case, the DOJ also tried to drop the charges, and the judge appointed an outside lawyer, just like Judge Ho did.
Wow, so there's a precedent for this kind of thing.
Yeah, it seems like when the DOJ tries to pull these moves, judges are getting more skeptical.
That's good to know.
Okay, so let's dig into why the DOJ wanted to dismiss the case against Mayor Adams in the first place.
Okay, so what was their reasoning?
So a DOJ official, we'll call him Emil B., said in court that dismissing the case was the right thing to do,
Okay.
and that it was in line with Trump and Attorney General Pam Bondi's policies.
Okay.
And they said the reason was that the case was getting in the way of the president's priorities on immigration and public safety,
Okay.
and that they needed Mayor Adams's help on those issues.
So they're saying they had to drop the case to get Adams to cooperate on immigration and public safety?
Yeah, basically.
That's a tough one.
It's like they're saying that a criminal case should be thrown out because it's inconvenient for the president.
Right. It's like they're putting political convenience ahead of justice.
Exactly. And it gets even wilder. Emil B. actually said something like, frankly, I think the fact that Mayor Adams is sitting here next to me is part of the problem. He can't be out running the city and campaigning.
Wow. Are you serious?
Yeah, the commentator was pretty shocked by that statement, too.
Yeah, I can imagine, because it's like he's saying that elected officials shouldn't be held accountable for crimes because it interferes with their jobs.
Right. It's like they're saying politicians get a free pass.
That's a dangerous precedent.
It really is. So let's get back to Judge Ho's order. What exactly did he tell Paul Clement and everyone else to do?
Okay, so what were his instructions?
So Judge Ho officially appointed Paul Clement as amicus curiae.
Amicus what now?
Yeah, it's Latin. It means friend of the court.
Oh, okay.
Basically, it means that Clement isn't representing either side in the case.
So he's not on the prosecution side or the defense's side?
Right. He's there to give the court an independent legal opinion.
So he's like a neutral expert.
Exactly. And Judge Ho gave him and the DOJ and Mayor Adams a bunch of specific questions to answer.
Okay, like what kind of questions?
Things like, what are the legal rules for dismissing a case?
Okay.
Are there any other documents the court should look at? And should the dismissal be with prejudice or without prejudice if it happens?
Wait, what's the difference between with prejudice and without prejudice?
So with prejudice means the case is closed forever. It can never be brought back to court.
Okay.
But without prejudice means it could be prosecuted again in the future.
Oh, so it's a big difference.
Huge. And Judge Ho also wanted them to think about what would happen practically if he refused to dismiss the case.
Okay.
And this is where the commentator asks a really interesting question.
What's that?
If Judge Ho says no to the dismissal, who's going to prosecute the case?
Yeah, because the DOJ clearly doesn't want to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a real dilemma, and it shows how messed up this whole situation is.
Yeah, it's like the system is kind of broken.
So that's where Paul Clemens, the amicus curiae, comes in.
Right.
He's basically there to represent the interests of the American people in this whole mess.
Because if he wasn't there, no one would be arguing against the dismissal.
Right. And the commentator used some really great analogies to explain this.
Okay, I like a good analogy.
He said it's like a football game where one team has switched sides and joined the other team. Like the DOJ has left their own sideline and gone to sit with the defendant.
So there's no one playing defense anymore.
Exactly. Or he said it's like a pickleball game where both sides are on the same side of the net.
That's a funny image.
Right. But the point is that the normal checks and balances are gone. The opposing force that's supposed to represent us, the public, is missing.
Right, because we need someone to make sure that people in power are held accountable.
Exactly. And that's what Judge Ho did by appointing Clements. He made sure that someone would be there to fight for our interests.
That's huge, because without that, who knows what would have happened?
So just to recap, we've got the DOJ under Trump trying to dismiss a corruption case against the mayor of New York City.
Right.
And it seems like they're doing it for political reasons, not because the evidence is bad.
Right, they want Adams's help with their agenda.
Exactly. And Judge Hose steps in, refuses to dismiss the case, and appoints an outside lawyer to argue against the DOJ.
Yeah, he's not letting them get away with it.
And the commentator makes a really good point. He says that Judge Ho's actions are a way of making sure that the American people have a voice in this case.
Right, because without him, it would just be the DOJ and Adams calling the shots.
And that's what's so important about an independent judiciary.
Right. Judges aren't supposed to be influenced by politics.
Exactly. They're supposed to uphold the law no matter what.
And that's what Judge Hose is doing.
Absolutely. So here's something for everyone to think about. What does it mean for our justice system when the Department of Justice seems to be putting politics ahead of prosecuting corruption?
Right, because that's a scary thought.
It is. And how does this idea of adversarial testing actually protect us? And what happens when it's not there? Those are the big questions we're left with after looking at this case.
Yeah, it really makes you think about how our system works and whether it's really fair for everyone.
Exactly. And that's what we're all about here on the Deep Dive, making you think critically about these important issues.
Absolutely, because knowledge is power. And the more we understand about these things, the better equipped we are to make a difference.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And to all of you listening out there, keep those brains working, and we'll catch you on the next Deep Dive.